So the purpose of this webinar today is to try and inform people about where legislation in the bill and the current activities which are allowed under the Vegetation Management Act. I guess as we've travelled around the state and talked to people who are attending the committee hearings and just people generally and the inquiry that they're having from the office, there is I guess a lack of understanding and knowledge about what has actually, in some cases, actually happened and what the space we're at currently in terms of these interim codes which have been introduced, the new mapping layers, and what it all actually means and what you can practically do on the ground and the concerns that people might have. So in the next hour, I'm with Dr. Greg Leach, our Senior Policy Advisor, and Noel Brinsmead, our GIS and mapping expert from AgForce, and we're going to attempt to try and describe, I guess, the path we're on from the introduction of the bill on March the 8th and moving on to what the implications are, a little bit of technical interpretation of the mapping, and some policy work which we're doing. And so thank you all for joining us today, and I'll move to the first slide. Okay, so since the bill was introduced, the Vegetation Management and other legislation amendment bill was introduced on March the 8th. There's been a few, I guess, quite significant changes. Going to the positives first, those people that have a property map of accessible vegetation, there's lots of areas which are not going to be affected by the introduction of a couple of particular things, so Category C, high value regrowth, and also Category R, 50-metre watercourse buffers. At this point, and it's obviously subject to debate in the House, the PMAV system appears to have been preserved as a way that you prevent the ingress or additional mapping layers being applied to those areas which you've previously developed, and intend to continue to manage the regrowth in those areas. Less favourably, there's been an extension of essential habitat areas, which include now near threatened wildlife, both plants and animals. And this is thought to affect probably around 2 million hectares Queensland-wide. Just moving to the next slide. So most people would be familiar with, in recent years, since 2013, the introduction of self-assessable codes. There are 3 new codes which have been introduced. There's currently no change to exemptions, so that's the general exemptions for clearing under the current Act. But the 3 new codes which have been introduced, and these will require a notification of the department if you intend to operate underneath them, include a new code for managing thickened vegetation, which basically can be described as what was known as thinning, the Category C regrowth code, and another interim code for fodder harvesting. The rest of the codes at this point in time basically remain unchanged, but we expect that they will be subject to review at a later date. And this is after the debate in the Parliament, and possibly later this year there is an intention that some of those codes will have some additional review. I'll just hand over to Greg Leach to make some comments to this debate.
Sorry, I just wanted to refer, for me, just to step back into this role with AgForce, and for me it's very much a Groundhog Day. We've been here before, we're here again. So in terms of what Andrew's saying about the self-assessable codes and the review of the process, we started this in 2016-17, going through these codes at that point in time. And we had, AgForce had a very successful, response to the code review, which was actually halted when we put to them our AgForce's position for fodder harvesting and for thinning.
Thanks, Greg. Just go to the next slide. So other changes, and this is starting to move into the area of additional mapping layers. So Category C and Category R, the intention of the government is to reintroduce those mapping layers to freehold and Indigenous freehold land. Also significantly, they've indicated that there will be no longer either, well, in the interim period, no new applications for high value ag or high value irrigated agriculture. They've stated that there will be a phase out of area management plans. That's expected to occur in 2 years. So in a moment, I'll just hand over to Noel Brinsmead to discuss what's actually happening with these new mapping layers and what the implications are and the potential impacts, I guess, and how people find out about what their property has, how it's been affected by these additional mapping layers. So Noel, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, everybody. On the slide in front of you now, just an example of a property in the state. The left-hand image demonstrates that this property did not have a PMAV in place at the time that the proposed bill was tabled on the 8th of March. And as you can see in that image, around about 90% or plus of that property was actually mapped as regulated Category X, being non-remnant, and about sort of 5 to 7% of that property had an area of regulated Category B remnant. So on the 8th of March, there were 4 new proposed mapping layers made available through the government's online geospatial tool. The first being the proposed regulated vegetation management layer. Second was proposed vegetation management supporting layer. Then the proposed essential habitat and the proposed wetlands. Using the proposed regulated vegetation management layer, the middle image shows you quite clearly that the proposed Category C, the orange areas, would severely affect this property, and no doubt the proposed Category R, reef watercourses with a 50 metre buffer around veg watercourses, also affect this property. As Andrew alluded to before, had this property had a PMAV in place before the 8th of March, this property would not have been affected by this bill. Having said that, looking at the amount of proposed Cat C and Cat R over this property, potentially they're going to lose around 56% of their regulated Category X area, which was originally mapped as non-remnant, to higher value regrowth and or the reef watercourses. The third image on the right, just to demonstrate that there's a couple of properties surrounding that one that do have a PMAV in place, and you can see that by the greyish areas, that's the PMAV Category X areas that have been locked in. So just to demonstrate that over that property, as an example, definitely no PMAV was in place. Next slide, please. I want to make clear also that even though a lot of producers around the state do have a PMAV in place, it is recommended that you also at least go and check these proposed maps to ensure that you may not have been affected by this proposed mapping. In the example here, the image on the bottom left shows a property with a PMAV in place. In fact, it's been in place since 2010. You may not be aware that since December 2013, the government has released 50 versions of the regulated vegetation management mapping. It's constantly changing, and that primarily affects those blue areas, Category B remnant. And as you can see there, since the PMAV was locked in, those grey areas, a lot of new white areas have appeared on that map. That could have come about either that the Category B blue areas since the PMAV have shrunk or disappeared, or quite possibly at the time they could have been mapped as Category C regrowth at the time, and that would have been light blue. So over the course of the time, over the last 4 or 5 years, with the 50 versions of regulated mapping released, there's new areas of Category X regulated mapping appeared on that map, and that's the white areas. So if the bill came on the 8th of March, you can see now in that top right-hand corner image that this property, even though with a PMAV, now remember that the PMAV has not been affected, never changed at this stage, but the right areas, because they haven't been locked in, this property has also suffered under this bill proposal as well with proposed Category C. So it's important that everyone does check their maps, regardless if they've got a PMAV in place or not. And there's 3 avenues allowing you to do that. You can certainly go online for the government's map request online through DNRMD. For those who are a bit more tech savvy, you could possibly look at your property using Queensland Globe. And for AgForce members, we've generated around about 8,000 PDF maps for every property we have of members in our database. And we put the request out last week for those who want to see their maps to get in contact with us, and we will email out or post those maps to those members. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Noel. So, just a little session here on the timelines for the passage of the bill, or what's expected. So, we've said a number of times the Vermola bill was introduced on the 8th of March. We're currently in the timeframe where submissions and public hearings are being held by the Parliamentary Committee. So the week before last, we had the committee tour Rockhampton, Townsville, Cloncurry, Longreach and Charleville. We were astounded by the attendance by landholders. Obviously the level of concern is very, very high, and that's understandable. This week there will be a hearing, an additional hearing in Brisbane tomorrow, and one on Cairns on Friday. So we'll be heading up to Cairns, myself and Grant Moore, the AgForce General President, and Mike Gearin to be at those hearings. There's also some demonstrations organised for people to participate in expressing their concern about this legislation, and that's this week. So the Parliamentary Committee report is due to be tabled on the 23rd. The government then has 3 months to then consider that report and commit the bill to its second reading and a vote to determine if all of the parts of the bill pass, or parts of it, or it's subject to amendment. We're expecting that this bill will move fairly quickly, and that the parliamentary debate would probably come back on in early May. Just who's on this Parliamentary Committee. So these are the people that are given the charter to review the bill in its current form, make recommendations about whether it meets the government policy and the purposes of the Act, and whether they make what is termed a dissenting report, that they don't agree with all the components of the bill, or whether they agree with it, and that report comes back to the government for consideration about which and what parts they may consider changing. So that's the State Development, Natural Resources and Agricultural Industry Development Committee, the committee that has the charter to consider this bill. It's chaired by Chris Whiting, an MP he's a Labor Party MP from Bancroft, so he's the chair. This is a government committee, and the chairs come from government. David Batt, from a member of the LNP party from Bundaberg. Jim Madden from the ALP at Ipswich West. Brett Mickelberg, LNP from Buderim. Jess Pugh from Mount Omni. Pat Weir, the member for Cont'd from the MLP, and the secretary of the committee is Dr. Jackie Dewar. Contact numbers there if there's some reason you need to contact the committee, and they're very amicable and have conducted quite a good process across the state, and we've been accommodated well, I think, in what we've sought to achieve and get people's representations to that committee. Moving now to some of the, I guess, more some of the compliance issues around the bill, and one of the concerning areas is, I guess, the increased compliance powers. To date, and recently, legislation like this type has probably been, not seen with such, I guess, punitive rights of entry. That this is a concern, and it is one part that has certainly raised the interest of the legal side of the fraternity, with their concerns about how some parts of this legislation may not meet the legislative principles. The increase of compliance powers, I guess, has been something that the Vegetation Management Act bill has seen over, or Act has seen over the years. So in this case, the entry provisions have been increased where authorised officers may enter without consent or warrant to investigate clearing activity. They are still required to provide 24 hours notice to the landholder that they will be coming on, but it's not necessarily needed that they have to go to see a magistrate to get an entry warrant. And a stop work notice may be issued. So if there is activity going on, if they do enter the property and discover that happening, they can issue a notice, and the penalties for failing to comply with the stop work notice are quite high. In terms of maximum penalty units for offences under the Vegetation Management Act of illegal clearing where it's prosecuted, they've increased significantly. So failing to comply with a stop work notice is a fine of $25,000. Providing false information has been increased to over 63,000, and failing to stop work or follow a restoration order has been increased to $567, or nearly $568,000. Current penalty unit is $126.15. Just a short note on an alternative piece of bill that's been introduced, and this has been introduced by the Cont'd Australia Party. So terms of vegetation management clearing for relevant purposes, Amendment Bill 2018. It was introduced on the 21st of March, and it was intended to provide amendments to the Act to provide a right of appeal for development applications. So where a landholder had put a development application in and it had been assessed, and they'd received basically a notice to say that it wasn't going to be accepted for the purposes of the Act, that this is intended to give them the right of appeal and to give some, basically to get from the Chief Executive of the Department the reasons why that development application had failed. The other part of the bill was to remove grazing as an excluded high-value ag activity, and this was to enable clearing for fodder crops. So this was seeking to extend the current provisions where high-value agriculture was only restricted to basically cropping, and but this was to increase fodder cropping and potentially, the concept of a hay paddock in the paddock as being something that met the purposes for high-value agriculture. So that bill's been referred to the same Parliamentary Committee as the other one, and it's got a report back dated the 21st of September this year. Just moving now to a little bit more detail about the 3 interim codes. So there's been 3 interim codes introduced on the March 8th, and they're effective from the following day. So for fodder harvesting, managing thickening vegetation, and category C regrowth. These three codes immediately supersede the previous codes which are in place. So any notification that you might have made for fodder harvesting or thinning or vegetation management and category C regrowth are no longer valid. So you have to re-notify, and there are the 3 new codes, and there has been some changes to them, and landholders need to notify the department and follow the practices contained in the new code. It doesn't mean that you have to cease what you're doing, but you do have to notify and pay heed to what's in those codes. Another thing with the new codes is landholders are being encouraged to keep records of what they're doing. So that could be photographic evidence, that could be some records of when work has been contracted, receipts, and what you're doing under each of those codes. And that's basically for your own, I suppose, protection if there is an issue to those codes. And that's basically for your own, I suppose, protection if there is an issue taken with when the work was occurring down the track, that you've got some record to say, yes, well, I notified on that date and we were working on this day. In terms of the information to keep on those interim codes, you'll notice when you notify, you do have to indicate the areas that you're going to be undertaking that work. So keeping records and just basically just keeping them in a file. If they needed to be provided to the Department of Natural Resources, Mines and Energy down the track that you've got them. So your GPS coordinates or a map that's identifying the area which you're proposing to manage thickened vegetation. potentially some pre-management photographs, so what it looked like before you started the work, and noting the date, so the commencement date, which direction you're travelling in or working in, and the associated GPS coordinates of that area that the operation was being undertaken in. Noel talked about the maps before, and this is where their importance comes into play. So having copies of your regulated vegetation maps and a supporting map for the property is important, and they should be obtained immediately prior to undertaking whatever management activity that you're doing in that vegetation. So just a couple of issues here. This is just how do you go about the notification process. So notifying DNRME, who's actually doing the work, whether it's the landholder or the person authorised to notify. It can be a third party with the consent of the landholder. It's basically a relatively simple process of completing the notification form, attaching evidence of the landholder's consent if that's required, if that's been done by a contractor, and lodging the completed form with the Department of Natural Resources, Mines and Energy. You should receive a confirmation of your notification before you commence the work, and it would be a good idea to keep also a copy of that, whether that's a reference number or an email or whatever communication is made to say that your notification has been received and accepted. Moving now to property maps of assessable vegetation. So PMAVs remain the mechanism for basically the protection of property right for previous developed land. So a PMAV that was lodged by close of business on Wednesday the 7th of March will be processed prior to the mapping changes being made. So the new maps that were introduced with the bill on March 8th, if you've had your PMAV in before, they're not going to apply, and they'll use the application date that you made that application as the date from which your application was made, basically. So in that case, the new layers of category C and B are not going to apply to areas under a PMAV. On areas that are PMAVs later than that, there may be opportunities to change category X to category A to protect vegetation. Now, just coming to thinning. So thinning is probably the most, in terms of self-assessable codes as they were, is probably the one that the area that's come under the most potential for change. So thinning in the future is going to require a development application to be lodged before your thinning activity is going to be approved. So this is the result of, I guess, some reviews of the existing codes which have been going on. One was done by a environmental consultancy, Cont'd, and subsequently there was an additional review done by the CSIRO. So an interim thinning code has been introduced effective for 6 weeks or until the legislation is introduced and passed, and that's basically known as the Managing Thickened Vegetation Code.
I'll just butt in, Andrew. I will say that with those who've got their proposed vegetation managed supporting maps, good chance for you to check the regional ecosystem numbers on that map and to then look at the code that's come out for thinning. There are a number of tables in there listing these regional ecosystems to allow you to determine if your property has these REs, allows you to apply for this application.
Thanks, Noel. So just a little bit on the reviews which have undergone. So some of the controversy and concern around thinning is thinning's always been provided for as a way to restore an ecosystem. So effectively what you're intending to do was to take an area of vegetation and bring it back to the levels that it had been previously or historically. So where you had vegetation thickening, that you were trying to restore the balance, basically I suppose preserve the tree grass balance, maintain pasture production underneath while still retaining a portion of the canopy and vegetation in the form of trees. There's been some reviewing of those area. One of the areas reviewed was the science supporting the revision of codes for the self-assessed vegetation thinning and also fodder harvesting. Now that was conducted. It was a peer review of basically the work that was done by the Queensland Herbarium. Subsequently, that review was provided for another review by the Commonwealth Science and Information Organisation, CSIRO, and that was titled A Review of the Science Supporting Revision of Codes for Self-Assessed Vegetation Thinning and Fodder Harvesting in Queensland. So these were done in February this year, so they're relatively recent, and this is why we've seen the changes, I guess, to the recommendations in that have been that, well, yes, there probably does need some further assessment about whether when you're thinning, that is actually in line with the purpose provided for in the Act, which restoring that ecosystem.
Yes, correct. So, and the CSIRO firmly point out that the ability to demonstrate thickening, they see as a considerable problem. So, I guess that's requiring better methodologies to demonstrate that thickening has occurred.
That probably goes to the core of some of the questioning that AgForce has been making about, yeah, okay, so it's all good to do this science, but it's also deficient in a lot of areas, and this issue about trying to measure thickened vegetation is something that comes up, quite regularly. I mean, I think, it's been referred to by Dr. Bill Burrows at length in the hearing in Rockhampton. He's published extensively on it. We know that with the State Land and Tree Cover Survey, that while it's a relatively effective way to determine the amount of vegetation that has been removed, it's not as robust in the way that it can tell you whether the vegetation is thickened, either its density in a particular place, or I guess statewide, how many more trees do we actually have in the system, and how quickly are they growing? So that's part of the reasoning why we've been quite adamant that a lot more work needs to be done in that space to get a full and comprehensive picture of what's actually going on with vegetation in Queensland, and what the implications of that are for things like I guess greenhouse gas emissions, the other things that vegetation gets used for, I suppose, to meet government policy. So just continue with the thinning code. So previously there were 5 codes for thinning across the state. That's now been reduced to 1 code. It's also been introduced with restrictions to area limits, and those limits are basically on lots that are less than 100 hectares. Only 10% of the total area, category B on the lot, may be cleared. On coastal areas greater than 100 hectares, 10% of the total area of category B areas, or 200 hectares, whichever is the lesser. On non-coastal lots, now you will have to refer to the code for this to see where those areas are, whether you're in a coastal area, whether you're non-coastal. In non-coastal areas, in lots greater than 100 hectares, 10% of the total area of category B, or 400 hectares, whichever is the lesser. The other thing that needs to occur if you're going to utilise the thinning code is being able to demonstrate the thickening of immature trees, and that's before you have to demonstrate that before you undertake thinning. And those immature trees per hectare limits are listed in the code in the table. Coming now to fodder harvesting. Fodder harvesting is not intended to go down the same path as thinning, so a development application is not going to be required for fodder harvesting. It's intended to remain a self-assessable code. There are, however, some changes. A notification and self-audit will be required for every 500 hectares, and the maximum strip width has been reduced to 50 metres, and you are required to retain 1.5 times that 50 metres outside of that strip that you are harvesting. And again, that fodder code was introduced on Friday the 9th of March, and it will have the same requirements of you need to notify there's some other issues with the fodder harvesting code. It is restricted to a certain area per lot, but you can put in a notification per if you have multiple lots for the areas prescribed. Yeah, Noel.
Further on the fodder harvesting, again, you need to refer to your vegetation management supporting map and those regional ecosystem numbers. They are listed in the interim code for fodder harvesting. Now, bear in mind that the new regional ecosystem mapping is based on version 10.1. Prior to 8th of March, we were working off regional ecosystem version 8.0. So you will probably note that in some respects between the two versions of the regional ecosystem mapping and the interim code for fodder harvesting, some regional ecosystems numbers have been removed from the interim code, and in some areas new REs have also been added. So just please check your veg supporting map and work out the REs you've got over your property, and then refer to the code to see if they're listed. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Noel. A couple of other parts of the bill, if it's passed, so they've reintroduced riverine protection permits, which were about, well, it says destroying vegetation, but removing vegetation in the bed and banks of the waterways. That was a clause that was removed basically in response to disaster recovery area, so that if you needed to, whether it was a landholder or whether it was a government institution, that they didn't have to go through the process of applying for a permit to go and basically remove vegetation which had been either washed downstream or was basically fallen in from the bed and banks of the river or a creek. We've already mentioned the development application for managing thickened vegetation, so and there's the additional requirements. Just, I'll talk here for a moment, just some of the issues around and the pressure coming from outside organisations about protecting PMAVs. The PMAV system, I guess, was introduced in around 2004. It was a part of the Vegetation Management Act at that time that was, prescribed that would be the way that we would protect, areas of land which had been developed. It essentially has withstood a number of iterations of, I suppose, organisations outside of agriculture determining that that it wasn't something that should be continued, that it didn't provide for adequate levels of protection, say for regrowth in those areas where I guess they sort of decided they were going to change the rules to some extent that everyone had been operating in, and I guess determine and almost invent new types of vegetation which had attributes which might have been termed high value regrowth. One of the things we're very concerned about at the moment is probably the change of definition in so what we knew as areas of land that have been cleared since 1989, a change to what is a definition where high value regrowth can be termed less than 15 years old or around 15 years old. That's certainly an area which is bringing some concern, and I guess there's been some statements made by some organisations that they see that a lot of these things shouldn't continue to be allowed, but I think that is part of a more robust debate that has to be had, and that we need to fully express the concerns that a lot of these routine operations that were being used, so like thinning, management encroachment, forest practice for that matter, and fodder harvesting were basically routine management and things that were necessary to continue and needed to continue and needed to be protected under a PMAV so they could be done routinely, and it was not necessary that there was additional controls and restrictions being placed on those areas. Yes, Chris.
I wanted to say, it always just amazes me that like a claim will be made here that 932,000 hectares of total vegetation has been removed over 3 years. But just do your sums, it's still less than 0.5% of the state or 0.7% of the remnant vegetation, which is actually 0.2% per year of remnant vegetation. So we're still dealing with very, very small numbers, which continues to amaze me.
So coming to, obviously we're in the middle of this conversation with the committee hearing still continuing. A couple of days of those to go. You know, what other options do you have to, I suppose, to express your concern about what these changes represent? I mean, there's always the option to contact your local MP and, you know, express your concern, or you can even contact, you know, a city-based MP for that matter. There's opportunities there for, we've produced, you know, a range of postcards where you can basically send that in and address it to whoever you like. There's always the option to contact the Premier. So the First Minister of the state is always, you know, the person that has the ultimate power of government and the decision making. You know, leaving a message or utilising the Australian Farmers website to send a message or an email is another option. I guess one thing that is brought to AgForce's attention regularly is like, how do we actually get people in the city and urban areas to understand what's going on in the bush and, you know, the importance of this. The debate is a lot more than just, you know, I suppose an argument about, you know, stopping excessive tree clearing and potentially koalas in, you know, the heavily populated southeast Queensland area. And I guess why are we having to continually re-justify every few years, you know, the need for us to maintain that balance between productive land and you know, and retaining some vegetation and, you know, I guess, you know, maintain a healthy environment, but also a healthy agricultural production landscape. It's very important, and, you know, we are looking at you know, better ways to get that message through to city people. You know, they're busy and they're not always, you know, I suppose, engaged with the issues, but it's part of a bigger program, I guess, to sort of get better awareness about, you know, rural and regional Queensland and the importance it is to the economy and the importance of the people that live there and you know, your country cousins and their association with their city friends. So, you know, it's always, if you've got contacts, it's always an opportunity, and, you know, if they're show enough interest, it's always up to them to say, you know, to go to their local MPs and say, hey, you know, I've got some cousins in the bush there, and you're really putting them through the mill here with all this stuff, and, you know, it seems to be happening a bit too regularly, and it's probably time that, you know, that you thought about what the actions of this government were taking and, you know, potentially backed off a bit, so, you know, so that farmers can get on with the job of producing food and fibre for the state and keeping everyone fed and adequately clothed. So I mentioned just before, so we've got an email campaign to the Premier. So that's being done in conjunction with the National Farmers Federation, which is AgForce is a member of, and you know, through your membership, those contributions enable us to form those partnerships with the National Farmers Federation. So that website's https://farmers.org.au/Veg Laws. Writing letters to the editor is always an option, and we've got plenty of rural publications, but there's also city publications as well. You know, 200 words, just calling on either the elected representatives or even just making your representations and sort of trying to draw to the attention of people that, you know, that read those papers, that opportunity. There's a lot of activity also on social media. So at AgForce Queensland, we're putting out a number of posts. There's an opportunity there to create your own post and video. You know, liking, sharing and commenting on anything you see is always beneficial and helpful. Tagging your local MP and explaining the importance of fair laws for sustainable agricultural production is another way to sort of get that message that, you know, that they get that they hear that, you know, there's a concern and that people are serious about this, and you know, social media is a great platform, I suppose, to get that message across. And there's across the state, there's groups of people that live and own businesses which have been particularly active in that area and are really using that forum and that platform to really get their message across. So Grassland Guardians, even Property Rights Australia, you know, they're really using that, and we're happy to support, you know, this this effort and this action across, right across the state, and from whichever group, is prepared to take on board, I guess, this argument and, provide support for pushing back on these changes to the vegetation law. So just some of the messaging that you might want to think about in what you say about vegetation laws. So, vegetation laws making it hard for farmers to grow food, and it's not going to deliver the best environmental outcomes. It's going to result in more red tape, especially during drought. There is some talk that, that there's organisations that are suggesting that, you shouldn't be able to harvest fodder except when you're drought declared. Well, I think one of the intrinsic values of a mulga block is the fact that it has that unique ability for mulga to provide a fodder for cattle, and and really productive cattle fodder, and for sheep as well. That it's something that should be, it's an intrinsic part of the value of that property, and further restrictions on that not only means that it can't be used, but it also has some serious consequences in terms of that property value when it's considered, well, if you consider a mulga block, mulga's an intrinsic part of the value of that property. So if someone comes along and says you can't use it, that's going to have some quite serious unintended consequences in the valuation of that property. So there's a reduction in equity. It means that your income is potentially reduced. But if you've got finance, obviously you've still got to meet that debt and meet your banker's requirements. More generally, shutting down agricultural development in Queensland. So we know that world demand is increasing. It's significant. Potentially be the food bowl for Southeast Asia and other parts of the world. We had a framework where there was an opportunity there for some increased agricultural areas to be developed under high value ag and high value irrigated ag. There was some people have taken up that opportunity, certainly in some broad scale cropping, but also in a lot of the high value horticulture and areas where we're talking several millions of dollars per hectare which can be produced in those areas. Sugarcane is another example of areas which have taken advantage of the capacity for high value agriculture. Now that looks like it's potentially disappearing, and that's a real shame. And I think some questions really need to be asked about, well, what's the attitude, I guess, of this Queensland government to agricultural production and its role in the Queensland economy, and its role for food security for society and the community. Of course, if farmers can't feed their own families, they can't feed yours. So, if they leave the land, if they decide that this is just too hard, well, they're just going to stop producing what they produce, and that's going to have some bad impacts, and means that they basically leave that community, and that has implications socially as well. So the only option really is to suggest that this bill needs to be rejected, and that the Queensland Government, with what they've proposed, it needs to work with farmers to basically deliver those long-term outcomes of economic success, production, and I suppose, and environmental outcomes. So that's just some of the messaging that you might want to consider if you're thinking of preparing letters or social media posts or submissions to anything, or contacting your MPs. Just some contacts here, anything, or contacting your MPs. Just some contacts here. This is contacting. Shouldn't hesitate from contacting the Department of Natural Resources, Mines and Energy about any of these issues. They are still the government. There are some suitably qualified people there that can interpret how this current framework of law is implemented, and what you need to do just to make sure that you're operating, I guess, within the guidelines. So this number is probably the most important one that you might see. So 135 Veg. Now that's a direct line basically to its regionally based offices, but that's there for advice and for any of those things that you may need to do with the government. So notifications and checking codes and maps and other information. And there's always the opportunity to contact us, myself and Noel and Greg here in the AgForce office. We've been out and about a bit and fairly busy, and there's been a lot of information and mapping distributed from this office. But yes, by all means, please feel free to contact any of us here in Brisbane, and also our regional managers, which are situated around the state. They're also on hand to help answer your queries and provide some guidance about working with the regional officers. So that's about us. We've got a couple of questions coming up. So the question that Tim P has asked, does Queensland have an agriculture minister? Yeah, we do at the moment. It's Mark Ferner, so he's the member for Fernie Grove. I'd probably suggest, Tim, that you're just querying whether or not where he is, and that's I guess that's a fair question. Just looking at another question here. So Sally T's asked, just wondering about the status of the March 21 amendment removing fodder crops from high value ag. Is that currently in place or yet to be decided on? Okay, Sally, so on that question, there is not currently, that bill would have to be debated, and that would have to amend the current act to introduce that as a purpose. So we're sort of fighting a bit of an uphill. We're actually struggling at the moment to even keep what we had under HVA for high value ag, which is cropping. That amendment which proposed that it be extended to fodder crops is being proposed in the Katter Party bill, and it has not been enacted yet, and it will have to be debated at a point in September. Okay, so thank you all for those online. Thanks for your patience and your time on listening to us today. We hope this has been informative, and I'd just like to thank my colleagues, Greg Leach, Noel Brinsmead, and Hannah Lur, who's been doing the technical side of this and keeping it operating. And yeah, we'll sign off now, and hope to see you somewhere soon. So thanks very much again. Bye now.